Hey, before today's episode, I want you to do me a favor by hitting that subscribe or follow button in front of you, depending on what platform you're currently using to listen to my podcast. I upload weekly, currently aiming to maybe put out 2 episodes per week, but until then, it is new episode every Sunday, 1 p.m. here in Vancouver or 8 p.m. GMT, if you even know what that means. So make sure you're also following Gentleman Pursuits on every social media as well. If you don't, you're missing out on some really, really good content I put out every day. Once again, it's Gentleman Pursuits. What is up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to the Gentleman Pursuits podcast. It's your host, Ryan. This is the 8th episode, and to be honest, this felt like it was the 3rd or 4th. I don't know. Maybe it feels like the 3rd or 4th legit episodes that I've put out. But the thing is, as you may have known, I do this podcast solo, and it has occurred to me that doing a podcast solo can be really hard sometimes. I'm not really used to talking alone for 15 minutes straight, unless I'm in a shower having an argument with myself, that can go on and on for like 30 minutes, packed with solid arguments. But talking alone about a certain topic can be hard sometimes. So if you're interested in watches and whiskeys, and you would love to sit down and talk about them with me into a mic, which will then be turned into an episode of the podcast, feel free to email me or direct message me on Instagram or Facebook. So, now that I've talked about fake shower arguments with yourself, there's this argument that has been going on for a really long time in the watch community. Actually, not an argument, more like a debate trying to point out which one is better, or is there even a better one? They're equal. And yes, if you've read the title, you'll know what I'm about to bring up. It's the pilot watch or diving watch debate. First thing first, I am a fan of both. However, there are a lot of different types of aviation watches and diving watches out there. And no, I do not like everything. So today I want to dive into the topic, pun intended, and sort of give you guys a better understanding on the difference between diving watch and pilot watches, and perhaps talk about some of my favorite from both categories. Well, unless you're in the forces, choosing between a pilot watch and diving watch is no longer a life or death situation. You choose because of the overall aesthetic. But sure, you may also want to have the right tool on your wrist for moments that you need it. With that being said, you can be a businessman wearing a diving watch, or a student with a sociology degree wearing a pilot watch, or a kid like me doing podcasts about watches wearing a medical watch. The point is, it doesn't matter. But here's the catch. Watch manufacturers are not dumb. Big businesses notice trends way better than us, and of course, they notice that. And they are starting to really blur the lines between traditional diving watches and traditional pilot watches to appeal to their audience. So what distinct between them, right? Let's start with diving watches. You've probably heard it a lot from people nowadays saying that diving watch owners don't even use the function anymore. Do they even know what the rotating bezel is for? I mean, yeah, you're right, but it doesn't matter that most people don't know how to use them. What matter here is that the question, why are diving watches so popular? Let's familiarize ourselves with what makes a diving watch. Well, I did some research, and according to the International Standard Organization document ISO 6245, which states that the key elements to a diver's watch must have. So the first must have is that it must be water resistant to at least 100 meters. Second one being a unidirectional rotating bezel with markings at least every 5 minutes, which is visible in darkness. And most importantly, the watch must be shock and magnetic resistant, because let's say my dumb ass went snorkeling and I kept bumping my watch on rocks. You wouldn't want the shock the shock wave to affect timekeeping accuracy. And here's the thing about diver's watch that makes it so popular among us. We are a clumsy species that constantly bump into everything. Your computers, your fridge, pillars, speakers. When you're absolutely mad at someone, you're banging the table a lot, right? All these circumstances will lead to watch movements malfunctions in the long run if your watch is not shock resistant. Also, diving watches are generally bulkier, built with a stronger case than other kinds of watches. You should feel safe wearing it under any situation. So combining all these features with a chunky, with a chunky case with a rotating bezel that you can play with, I guess you get a watch that is so reliable. It scares you. It's basically a tank on your wrist. Some of my favorite diving watches are, of course, Seiko SSC 618P, which I am going to do a review soon. Maybe the Panerai BMG Tech Submersible, and of course the Rolex Submariner. Must have. Right, I'm working hard towards it. So if you guys want to donate money to help me pursue my dream of buying a Rolex, I will link my PayPal down below. Okay, just kidding. Let's move on to pilot watches now. For pilot watches, there's no ISO, but there's something called the TESTAF. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly. It's TESTAF. It's a short for a bunch of German words I can't pronounce. So TESTAF is a German technical standard for pilot watches, but this has so far been applied to one brand of pilot watches only, Sinn. But then after all, most of them share a few similarities. Let's go over them. First of all, a pilot watch is usually less bulkier than diver's watch. They are usually appreciated by their utilitarian aesthetic and the practicality of it. And of course, the earliest usage of a pilot watch was within armies, but armies didn't have to be brand loyal. They need the most precise devices for their pilots to help them in war. This gave birth to tons of pilot watches with different styles. The Brigade Type 20, one of my favorite, the IWC Mark series, and more and more. Earlier models of pilot watches are huge, and according to Mr. Max Reddick, they were as big as 55 millimeters with an iron core within the case to make the watch anti-magnetic. And it came with a really long strap for pilots to wrap it around their leather jacket or maybe gloves. And yes, some of you may think that, whoa, 55 millimeters, isn't that a little bit too big? Well, let's keep in mind that pilots have to monitor a lot of stuff in the cockpit. And so the bigger the display is only going to help them check the time faster. This also explains some of these common features found in pilot watches. Easy to read dial. They usually keep the dial design to be as simple as they can. And usually somewhere around the number 12, there would be some sort of indicator. If we take IWC pilot watches as an example, there will be a huge triangle at the 12 o'clock direction. Reasons being, it allows pilots to look at the time at a quick glance. So when in a quick glance, if you can see the triangle, it's 12 o'clock. So you can kind of guess what time it is with the hands positions. Another common features among pilot watches is the flyback chronograph function. The flyback chronographs allows pilots to reset the timer at a push of a button and helping them with their waypoint navigation. And last but not least, almost all pilot watches have huge crowns, onion or conical, because back in the days when cockpits are unheated, pilots would have to wear thick gloves to keep their hands warm, and thick gloves and small crowns they do not go well, right? So big crown was the way to go. So after analyzing or giving you guys a better understanding on pilot watches and diving watches, if I were to give a piece of advice for people that are currently deciding which one to purchase, I would say if you want a more sturdy everyday watch that can almost last you a lifetime, I would go for the diver's watch. But the downside to that is it's not really a formal gathering appropriate. It just doesn't. Let's say you're wearing a tux, right? Wearing a diver's watch just look weird. So if you are a person that has to attend a lot of formal gatherings, I'd say go for a pilot's watch. If not, you're just looking for everyday watch that looks good on with every outfit except for a tux or something like that. Go for the diver's watch. They are better in the long run. Hey guys, thank you so much for listening to the latest episode of the podcast. Make sure you hit that subscribe or follow button in front of you. I'm not sure if you're listening this on Spotify or Anchor, but either way, make sure you're following me on every social media platform, on Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, Anchor, Spotify, everything. Just make sure you're following me. You'll get the latest news on articles, uploads, podcasts, new news, all kind of posts on watches and whiskeys. If you're not, you're missing out. So yeah, make sure you're following us. And until next Sunday, have a great week, guys. Stay safe. I'll see you guys.